If you're teaching yourself generative AI at the foundational level, or more particularly, if you're teaching yourself active inference, there are three things that we should put on the table right away. Number one, you're not a dummy. Number two, you haven't screwed up. And number three, nobody's at fault. This is a genuinely cognitively challenging task. It is about an order of magnitude more complex, more arduous than teaching yourself basic artificial intelligence. So let's scope out why this challenge is indeed more difficult. In this YouTube, we're going to identify the four big gotchas that show up as we pursue our studies of active inference, specifically focusing on active inference, more generally, the whole generative AI capability. And those are gotchas. So let me tell the story by analogy. Every great hero going on the heroic journey encounters specific dangers. There's fighting monsters. There's crossing arid deserts where we're parched, nearly dying of thirst. And there's the more subtle, you can't even tell people about it directly kind of dangers because it creeps up on you. So Odysseus encountered the sirens, that call of beauty, that call that promised understanding and a deep intuition about the world that he was in. Frodo encountered the mirror of Galadriel deep in the forest, and it was presenting visages and images, and it almost seemed to have the sort of knowledge that he really craved coming together, and yet it never really meshed. Luke Skywalker encountered Darth Vader's helmet in the dark cave. He was seeing images appearing, and once again, it sucked him in. It was almost there and not quite. And the corresponding realm in active inference studies is that as we read various papers with different kinds of notation for the same concepts, our minds tend to get crosswise. This isn't the kind of danger that I talk about in the going over the Oregon Trail and the mountainous passes, the Donner's Pass kind of thing. That's more like the whiteout when you're, for example, trying to look up the partition function and getting so many sources that your mind just numbs out. This is different. You're getting a lot of sources. They're giving you information. They overlap. It's like looking at topographic maps of the same area, but they're written in different languages. Today, we're going to sort this out. Today, I am your Lady of the Lake, presenting you, the young King Arthur, before he became king, with a sword. And that's your voice of clarity. It's your voice of insight. It's your wisdom. And with this, and specifically with a single slide that I'm going to show you later in this video, and you will be able to download that slide in a PDF. The link will be in the description box. The link will be in the associated blog post, and it will provide you with a crib sheet for understanding how it is that these various notations collide and can be disambiguated. So that's what we're going to have as the output for this whole video. Now, there are four very distinct gotchas, and we're going to go through them in order of fairly simple and sometimes maybe not even germane to what you're doing, up to the most complex, most subtle, most delicately nuanced, and that is really important for you. So we'll start with the basic one. It's the terminology or vocabulary or the variable term for the entropy as it appears both in statistical mechanics and information theory shows up as the background from which we're pulling the KL divergence, the Kullback-Leibler divergence, which I will hereafter refer to as KL because Kullback-Leibler divergence will take us all afternoon. KL divergence, entropy, coming out of information theory. The term that they use for it is H. But if you're coming to the whole realm of active inference from the perspective of physical chemistry or physics, and you've gone through a lot of derivations, then you've got the free energy is equal to the enthalpy minus, and I'm removing the T, we're doing a reduced free energy here, minus the entropy. And that's H for the enthalpy and S for the entropy. So in physics and physical chemistry, entropy is S. In information theory, it's H. And in physics and physical chemistry, H is enthalpy. In information theory, it's something else. There's usually an L kind of term because you're dealing with an expectation of a log likelihood. That's for a different day. That's an easy enough one for us to straighten out in our mind. Let's move on. Gotcha number two. Okay, gotcha number two. If you're coming into active inference from a physics or physical chemistry background, then you may see the terms Helmholtz free energy or Gibbs free energy And you may start to conflate them with variational free energy, which is what we're really dealing with. And here's the thing. Neither Helmholtz free energy nor Gibbs free energy have any meaning whatsoever in active inference or in generative AI. They are physics/physical chemistry terms. They differ because they come about through two different derivations. Both derivations are dependent on the fact that in physics and physical chemistry, we're coming about the free energy notion and alt stat mech with particles being in an enclosed volume, and then we have temperature and volume and pressure for this enclosed volume with particles. And then depending on how you do various derivations, you get a Helmholtz free energy or a Gibbs free energy. Don't worry about it in the generative AI space. Not a relevant discussion. If you see those terms applied, just bliss on over. Not important. Okay, gotcha number 3. This is the great PQ mix-up. And, it's like being on a mountain path and getting sort of fogged out and losing your way and just thinking that you're on the wrong side of the mountain. For years, I was mixed up. Alrighty? It was like being on the north side of the mountain and thinking I was on the south side or vice versa. And here it is. This is the Kullback-Leibler divergence, mainstream fundamental equation. I talked about it in the previous YouTube. We'll talk about it again, probably the next YouTube. And we're not doing the math of it today. What we're doing is saying that Kullback-Leibler divergence, the KL, it's a divergence measure, which isn't quite a difference measure. It's how far does one thing differ from another. And the KL divergence works with two distributions. And typically when you're taught the KL divergence, when you encounter it for the first time because you're looking it up on the wiki or something, it is expressed as data as being compared to a model. Data compared to a model. And the model is Q. The model is always Q. That notation doesn't change. The data is P. So you're comparing data distribution set P against a model, a reference model Q. And perfectly fine, perfectly legit, not a problem there. But when you go into the active inference realm, and in fact, anything in generative AI, because you can go back and see an early Hinton paper with references to the same. You're not comparing the data against the model. You're comparing the model against the data. And the model has parameters that you can tweak, and the data is being referred to as that fixed element that we are comparing against, and we tweak parameters to bring the model closer to the data. Now, there's a subtlety, and I went into this in the last vid in depth, and that is that we're not really dealing with the data in the data space, the observation space. We're dealing with everything in the latent space. But still, in the KL divergence for active inference, it's Q versus P. It's model versus data. Actually, it's the model of the hidden variables in the latent space compared against the hidden variables that are produced by the generative model in the latent space from the observations. But Q versus P, it's always the reverse KL divergence. It's always model versus data, or it's always model versus observation. That was gotcha number 3. All of the 3 gotchas that we've considered so far, hey, they're relatively easy. They're relatively speaking straightforward. But now we've got a set of them that are all interwoven, and I'm going to both talk to you about them, and at various points I'm just going to be consulting the slide that I put together with hours of work last night, drawing on years of work prior. And this is a slide that is downloadable. Once again, link in the discussion box, link in the blog post. And this is what's the most delicately nuanced subject of our entire conversation. If you get this, you got a crib sheet. This is your Lady of the Lake giving you the sword. It's the variables that are inside the P and the Q, the model and the distribution of hidden variables dependent on observables. So here we start. And by the way, our reference for this is the Namjoshi text. It is Fundamentals of Active Inference. So let me start. You know how in our culture, when we nod our head up and down, we mean yes. When we go left to right, it means no. And that's true United States, UK, most of Europe. If you're in Bulgaria, nodding your head up and down means no. And if I were to come to you and say, hey, can I borrow your horse for the afternoon? And you nodded up and down, and then I went to your barn and started leading out the horse, I'd be seeing you with your loaded shotgun pointed straight at me, and your sons and your brothers would be there with loaded shotguns pointed at me, and I'd say, oops, cultural miscommunication. That's what we've got right here. When you and I are kids and we're learning algebra, we always present x as the observed variable, so to speak. Like you're standing on a building that is 18 feet above ground and you throw a ball, that kind of thing. And what we're asked to do is compute y as a function of x. Now, y is not a hidden variable. It's not latent space. It's a function. But we're used to starting off with x as observed, and then you do something with it and you get a y. In Namjoshi, which is a beautiful book, and I'll have more to say about its beauty, x is the hidden variable. It is the latent space variable. This is so important. It's like warping our heads around. It's like taking a jellyfish, that has this umbrella-shaped front and the streamers out the back, and inverting the jellyfish. And it would be weird, and I'm by no means suggesting crimes against the persons of jellyfish. I'm just saying that when you move into active inference, the starting place is the inverse of how you think. And it takes a while to warp our heads around to this. Where we start from, where Namjoshi and others put us as we begin to think and construct our mindscape around this, is in the space of the latent variable. And then from that, and from the space of the latent variables, we generate, this is why it's generative AI, okay? We generate the observable variables. Okay, so this is true for Namjoshi. This is Namjoshi text right here. 2026, it's January of this year, and it's worth the $200, okay? It's also the YX usage, or actually let's say X and then Y. X being latent space, Y being observed. This was also in Matthew Beal's dissertation, 2003, I believe it was. And here's a little, parenthetical note. Matthew Beal, getting his PhD out of, I think it's University College London, UCL. And that's where Carl Friston has had his base for many years. He's still there. That's his home base academically. And I don't think that there was any direct crossover between Beal and Friston, but Friston has used Beal's notation from Beal's dissertation as his starting point. So when you pick up a Friston paper, it's always, or here's the starting equation, and you look at it, whoa. It's a fairly fancy heavy-duty equation. And then little parenthetical note, Beal 2003. It's like, so when I was teaching myself active inference, I looked at Friston and went, oh. Then I found the Beal 2003 dissertation, and that was my study guide, okay? And Beal and Namjoshi use the same X and Y notation. Now, here's where it gets weird and difficult. We're not even talking about Friston's notation yet. Not even going there, okay? That's a separate discussion. It's coming up, but separate. When I was teaching myself active inference, I also got a paper by Blei and colleagues circa 2016, 2017, depending on whether you're looking at the archive or the published version, the journal published version. And I think it's called Variational Inference, a Review for Statisticians. So he's coming purely out of that information theoretic and statistical space. And beautiful paper, highly, highly cited. And I was particularly going in because I wanted to get his interpretation and description of that key equation, starting with the KL divergence and moving on. And he used the notation in a flip-flop manner. So in Blei and colleagues, 2016, beautiful paper, X, which was the hidden variable or the latent space variable over in Namjoshi, over in Beal, is now the observed variable, and Z is the latent. So X is preserved across the notation, but it has the reverse meaning. And that's that head-spinning moment. It's like, whoa, what's a tap? I found it absolutely impossible to read Beal and Blei and Friston, which got into its own space at the same time. And what I wound up doing was I wrote a tutorial for myself that wound up being 70 plus pages. It's called Derivation of Variational Bayes. It is an archive paper, and I've got the link to it in the blog post. So You'll definitely be able to get that. That would be the ultimate self-study guide if you're reading original Friston papers and you're trying to work your way through that notation, which we're getting to in just a moment. Okay, now we're going to deal with the P's and Q's of the situation. So I'm going to partly just talk with you direct, partly we're going to be overlaying this with the slide that you'll be able to get once again. Link in the description box, link in the blog post. So we're going to go to that row that deals with the approximate posterior. And the approximate posterior is the model. The model generates an approximation, and it's a posterior, or after the fact, so to speak, because we start with the observations and the latent variables that we generate from the observations, but then we can create the posterior or the model from that. So approximate posterior, now reading left to right, Namjoshi, Q of X. This is all Q because it's the model. Beal, Q of X. Get over to the far right side, and that would be this side for you. To the far right side, and it is Blei, and it is Q of Z conditioned on X. Okay, we had that X switch its role there. We're not dealing with Friston yet. Let's go down to the bottom row. And in the bottom row, we've got the probability distributions, which are actually the generative model, meaning we're not just dealing with the observations. If it was just observations, it'd be P of Y. But no, we do our work in the latent space, and we get the latent space variables via a generative model process. So we've got this generative model giving us P of Y conditioned on X. That is, you give it an X, and it gets, using a model, a Y. So P of Y conditioned on X for Namjoshi, and much earlier from Beal. And now when we go over to the Blei et al., we get a P of X conditioned on Z. You know, I'm having to reshoot this little section because once again, I did that mental inversion and I had things mixed up. I tell you, this is insidious. I've been working on this for days, literally days. And this slide that you're seeing that I'm using as a B-roll, it's built on work that I've done for years. So it's like we can continue to get tripped up. So let me go through that bottom line with you. It's the P line where P is the generative model. And what we're generating is not the hidden based on the observed. It is the observed based on the hidden. We are saying that we have some sort of hidden variable and we generate an observation based on that generative model. That's why it's generative AI again. So in the Namjoshi, it's P of Y conditioned on, that is given an X as a starting point. That is, generate my observable variable Y given a starting variable, hidden variable, latent variable X. Same thing for Beal back in 2003. Go over to Blei and colleagues 2016, 2017 era, and they give you P of X, the observed variable, conditioned on the hidden variable Z. Okay, all of this is good so far, right? We've got this. Now let's go to Friston. Friston, God, I love the man. And here's the thing. His papers tend to be slightly different in notation. Every single one is just a little tiny bit different from the other. And when you're inside the Friston space, I'm sure it makes tremendously logical sense, and working with people and everybody is whiteboarding and, you know, it evolves naturally. I can understand that. For somebody coming in from the outside, setting up a set of Friston papers and trying to read one after the other, oh, it can be mind-boggling. Okay, you're not alone is what I'm saying, and you have not screwed up if this has been enormously confusing for you. Now, I'm going to make a comment here going back to Namjoshi first. Namjoshi's text is simplified. You'll look at it and say, let me just find you something here, just for fun. Let's get into chapter 4. Chapter 4 is where we do variational free energy. God, it is beautiful. It is exquisite. The amount of work that it took to reduce this thing is mind-boggling. And there is a very, very important set of equations on page 99, I believe. The thing is in microfont. I mean, if I have one big complaint about the Namjoshi text, it's their microfontness of it. There are 4 variations on the theme of variational free energy equations. That in itself is kind of mind-bendy. And Friston was introducing them at various points and without reference to the prior equations. And I'd look at this and say, I barely worked my way through the previous derivation, and now this looks entirely different. The notation is different. The equation outcomes are different. I would just bang my head against the wall for a while and cry, okay? And Namjoshi has put them all into the same notation. That's beautiful. And he's got them in one box so you can read them against each other. It's fabulous. An enormous amount of work. But as a natural consequence of doing that, Namjoshi's text is reductionist. And I don't mean this in a pejorative sense at all. He had to get everything down to a smooth, consistent basis. And what happened? This happened naturally. It was not like, in any sense, an attempt to oversimplify, but this is just how things evolved. Namjoshi is sort of this, it's the model, okay? It's the smoothed out version where all the bumps and dips in the terrain have been smoothed out. And when you go to the original Friston materials, which at some point you should be doing, because there's depths and intricacies, and it's always wise once you've got the basics to go and study source. There are two primary variants in the Friston space, so to speak, and that is on top of the numerous little variations. So we're going to look at the columns involving Friston, and they are columns of Friston up until 2016. In my mind, those are the 2013 and 2015 Friston papers. He did those alone. And then starting in 2017, he was working more with other people, and something very important shifted in that time frame. So let's work through that very carefully together, okay? I've got my slide pulled up. I'll be B-rolling the slide to you. Let's look at the pre-2016 Friston column together, shall we? It's got two variables that we're putting down for the observable space. That's the S and the A, and they have a little tilde, a little wavy line on top of them. And S stands for the information that you can get from sensing, and the A stands for the information that is actually given to the external environment from your action. Sensing coming in, action going out. And the tilde means that they are generalized variables. He drops that a little bit later, and I drop it in my own work when I'm trying to interpret Friston. And the next one down is the big capital Psi. That's the Greek letter that looks like a pitchfork, or Neptune's trident, if you would. And that is also got a tilde on top, and that is the generalized representation of the outside world. This is where things get absolutely weird, and we need to breathe our way into the space. This was a major, major tripping up point for me as I was teaching myself, and I got a sort of resolution for it about 5 or 6 years ago. I actually got it sort of in a dream space, which tells you how hard it is to like really become one with the equation. And I've been working on this for days, and I was exhausted, and I was in a fairly emotional state about it, and I took a break, watched some Downton Abbey stuff. Now, I know that I told the story in a previous vid, but let me refresh it with you real quick. Downton Abbey. From within the Abbey, the butler, the housekeeper, the cook, they all have a model of their space. And they don't go out. Let's pretend that they don't go out particularly. When they want to influence the environment, they send out an order, for example, like I want to buy 3 dozen eggs, or I'm buying casks of wine, or whatever it is. They're sending out an action, and then they bring information in. They bring in a newspaper, they bring in receipts, etc. So they have action items and sensing items in their capability. They have their agents. And the external world is Psi. It is separated from the estate, let's assume, by a nice big stone wall. So from within the estate, you don't cross over the boundary to the external world Psi. You build up a representation of the external world Psi through message passing, essentially, back and forth. You're doing agents that go out and come back in. From the perspective of being inside the estate, the external world is the hidden space or the unknown. This is weird. It is totally mind-bendy, but that is Friston in his earliest days, and it is an innovation that is unique to active inference. This is not in the earlier Beal dissertation. This is somewhat hidden from view, if you would, in the Namjoshi text, because once again, he's trying to simplify and make it accessible to like engineers. But if you consider it, what we're saying is we don't know the external world at all. We are building up our internal representation of the external world. By the way, the R, the little R with the tilde on it, that's the representation that we're building up internal to our estate, so to speak. Now, if you would, go to that next line down, the one that says approximate posterior. And that is the model. This is the model that we're building up of the external world dependent on our internal representation of the external world. And what it says is we're building up a model of the external world psi that's dependent on what we construct internally. Also bordering on the mystical. Also very, very much kind of matrixy. It's like the outside world doesn't exist. It is something we build up from our internal headspace and we project it to the outside. And you're getting that entire metaphysical construct inside an equation. So instead of having like long books about it or treatises, one equation. In our generative model, what we're saying is that we get a generative model that includes psi, S, and A, the values that are passed back and forth by our sensing and active action agents, and the internal representation that we build up, all dependent on something called M. M is the model. M is the internal model that we have that allows us to generate. We're looking at a generative equation here that gives us that which we observe conditioned on our model. So we're getting the external world. We're getting the values of the variables that are passed back and forth, the sensing and action agents, and we're getting our internal representation all conditioned on a model. Now there's one column left. Let's take that on. It's nuanced in just a subtly different way, and it represents an evolution that Friston himself made with colleagues starting in about 2017. Get this, and you've got the big arc of active inference mastered, and you can deal with the equations on your own, and you'll be so much the better for it. Let's have a look. We are in that column second from the right, the Friston 2017 and onward column. First one is not so bad. The observed or the observables, that's the O or sometimes a Y. Y kind of corresponding to what Namjoshi and Beal have, so thank God for that one. The hidden or latent variables are sometimes not consistently, not always, but often enough referred to with a Greek letter that looks like an N with a downward tail, and it's eta. So external states, eta, fine. We're not really giving a variable to the internal representations in that particular column. The model, the approximate posterior, that is Q of eta as conditioned on mu, where mu is, this is subtle. This is a transformation. This is not just the original eta hidden variables dependent on the observables. Mu, the one that looks like a U with a tail at the beginning, is sufficient statistics. I'm reading it across the screen. I garbled that word a few times. Sufficient statistics of the internal states. So what's going on is that the agent, the internal being, shall we say, inside the estate wall, so to speak, has compressed the representation that it's gathered over multiple observations and multiple messages of things coming in and things going out into a representation based on that. That is a whole nother level of evolution. It's a big one. So the Q of eta conditioned on mu is the approximate posterior. That is to say, it's a model of the external world, the eta, dependent on our representation, in fact, a consolidated representation, a sufficient statistics representation of the internal world. So, for example, if we had a Gaussian set of variables, a Gaussian distribution, we wouldn't be using that Gaussian distribution anymore. So we might be using instead the central point for the Gaussian peak and the sigma. It's a simplified representation of the originating information. That's actually very big, and it's subtle, and it's internal. It's a shift. We want to keep that in mind. One more variation yet to go. The last one says that the probability distribution, our generative model, giving us the observations based on our internal modeling capability, is giving us O, observations, and eta, the external world, conditionally dependent on our model M. With this, we have done, you and I, the most convoluted, delicate, nuanced, subtle mentally intensive thing that I've ever put together. And you've got this, you've got access to this slide for forevermore. Go forth and conquer. Now, let's talk about going forth and conquering, shall we? We're going to talk about resources. I've mentioned, of course, Namjoshi. I will herefore continue to reference Namjoshi. But let's give you a full resource picture, because this is what you need right now. Active inference, obviously beginning 2010, Friston's original paper in the area, 2013, 2015, early defining works, 2017 and onward, a lot of works. Just now we're beginning to have more academic interest, the number of papers being published increasing substantively every year. Just now we're beginning to have more people doing efforts to build practical applied tools using active inference. Where we are lacking across the board is education. So if you're attempting to self-educate, here's your basic resource starting deck. Namjoshi text, obviously. Active Inference Institute. Twice a week, Daniel Friedman, president of the Active Inference Institute, Andrew Pashka, and Fraser are all leading together 2 sessions per week on the book's contents. They're leading a study group. And you don't have to attend both. They are the same content, different days. So each of those sessions is recorded. It's available as a YouTube from the Active Inference Institute. And Namjoshi very kindly made copies of the equations, the figures. He provides pseudocode. It's a huge gift, okay? I don't know of any other book that gives that much value external to the book and provides it to the community. So absolutely, even if you don't have the book, you can attend the sessions. You can follow along because they reference the figures, they reference the equations, they blow it all up and show it on the screen. It's easy enough to follow. And it's such an incredible gift of all of these people to offer their time and resources so consistently. This is huge. So that's one set of resources right there. Another is Themesis. We take a different approach. Namjoshi, God bless him, he's a Bayesianist. He's got chapter 2. It is the best exposition of Bayesian logic that I've ever heard. It's a really, really clear exposition. Well worth getting into that chapter 2 just on its own. And then chapter 4 is the variational free energy. Well worth the price of the book for that chapter. But he's coming at it from that strictly Bayesianist approach with a very light touch on the Kullback-Leibler, a really light touch on the stat-mech. We at Themesis are coming at this from the different approach. We're coming at it from the stat-mech perspective. It's a conglomeration. It's really 3 mountain ranges, if you will. The stat-mech, the Bayesian, they hinge together at the Kullback-Leibler, and Themesis offers you the stat-mech element. So in our top 10 terms in statistical mechanics, about to be renamed as top 10 terms in generative AI and active inference, and we're going to reshift those terms a little bit. We'll keep it at 10. It started off as a 2-week course just on the stat-mech. Now it's expanded to a 3-week course, and I've been revising that week 3 content because we needed better pedagogy. We needed to hook up the Bayesian and the Kullback-Leibler more tightly and concretely with a loop back to the stat-mech. So we started with all the stat-mech that you would ever want to need. You would never need another stat-mech course in your life. But we connect once we get into the probabilities and then into the KL divergence back to the entropy concept from the stat-mech. And these things are interwoven in a way that makes sense of why we have these 3 different conceptual realms hooking together. So in the blog post, I give you a link to the Themesis Thinkific course. Please do check that out. Now, one other set of resources that you must know about, because my cohort 1 people told me this, and it was a big thing when they said it, because I've been somewhat code adverse. I'm not the best coder in the world. With Claude, hey, this has been a pleasure. It's been a joyous experience. But here's the thing. We need code. We absolutely have to have code, not because we need the code, but we need the models. We need to be able to take a little situation that's in our heads and saying, God, I wish I could use active inference on this, and break it down to the simplest possible thing that we could possibly use as a model, and actually model it, actually construct the matrices that we see embedded in the code, and work through all the logical points of what does this problem that I'm conceiving of and I would like to solve, taken into the active inference space, what does it really mean as I try to build a model around it in all of its point-by-point elements. So the PyMDP, PyMDP, Python Markov Decision Process model, built originally by Friston and colleagues, built in MATLAB. That's in the 2017 era, probably moving forward a good few years. Then various colleagues of Friston, Connor Heinz, I believe, being the leading protagonist there, built it in Python, giving us the PyMDP version. And this is not an educational pedagogic code base. This is a research code base. I've listened a little bit, not the whole thing yet, I will, to Connor's YouTube describing the currently as it's existing PyMDP code. That's April 2026 YouTube. Very well done, but frankly intimidating. And if you're coming into this and your knowledge of the active inference space is growing, shall we say, and your Python is maybe rusty or weak, and you're trying to put it all together, not the place to start. So Themyscus has put together a lab course, and it is going to go hand in hand with top 10 terms. And it's like you're taking Chemistry 101 if you're taking the beginner's approach. So let's go to Chemistry 110, the majors course, or Physics 110, the physics majors course. And you know that in all these hard sciences and in the corresponding engineering classes, you sign up for lecture and you sign up for lab. And the lab is its own course, and it is a kick you in the rear course. If you're doing the solid, hardcore majors course in a hard science. And it is essential. And same thing right now with the course that Themyscus is offering, which is still in the build stage. It's actually called Building Active Inference in Python. We have week 1 largely done. We're now doing week 2, which is variational free energy. Then we're going to have week 3, active inference, like we actually will do inference. And then there's going to be a week 4, special week 4 in both classes. Week 4 is bonus material. Can't disclose it yet, but it's very exciting. And with that, we lost the last bit of our video recordings. So this is Alianna Maren signing off from Themyscus. And please do go to themyscus.com, opt in on our About page, and that'll make sure that you get all the latest updates on learning resources in active inference. Thank you, have a lovely day, and we'll see you again soon.